You know the picture, right? The Wright brothers, a windy beach, that iconic first flight. We all know that story. But what if I told you the real story? How these two guys succeeded where the smartest, richest people in the world were failing spectacularly is way more interesting than you've ever heard. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's the turn of the 20th century, and the race to conquer the sky is absolutely on. I mean, everybody who was anybody was trying to crack this problem. Inventors all over the world were pouring fortunes into building flying machines, totally convinced they were just one tiny breakthrough away from glory.
And leading the pack was this guy, Samuel Langley. He was the head of the Smithsonian, the nation's top scientist. He had $50,000 in government money. That's like over $1 million today. And his big idea, the Great Aerodrome, was based on what all the experts believed, that the problem of flight was all about power. Just build a massive engine, slap some wings on it, and boom, you're flying. Well, as you can see, they were spectacularly wrong. Twice.
So, this is the big question, isn't it? How on earth did two bicycle mechanics from Ohio, guys with no college degrees, working out of the back of their shop with less than $1,000 of their own money, how did they solve a puzzle that had stumped the greatest minds for centuries?
Well, they did it by looking at the problem completely differently. See, while everyone else was obsessed with getting off the ground, the Wrights were focused on how you would stay in the air once you were up there. For them, the problem wasn't about power. It was all about control. And that one simple, brilliant insight, it changed absolutely everything.
So yeah, Wilbur and Orville Wright, bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio. And you know what? Turns out their day job was the perfect, and I mean perfect, training for inventing the airplane.
Just think about it for a second. A bicycle, right? It's a totally unstable machine. You can't just sit on it and expect it to stay up. You have to constantly balance it, making tiny adjustments. This gave the Wrights a completely different mindset. All the other inventors were trying to build these inherently stable aircraft, machines that could basically fly themselves. The Wrights thought that was crazy. They knew the pilot needed to be in total control, always balancing the craft, just like riding a bike.
And that philosophy led them straight to their single greatest invention, something called three-axis control. They figured out that to really fly, a pilot had to be able to control the plane's movement in 3 different ways. You've got pitch, that's nosing up or down. You've got yaw, which is swinging the nose left or right, kind of like a rudder on a boat. And then there was the trickiest one of all, roll, tilting the wings from side to side so you can bank into a turn.
And the way they solved roll is just a fantastic story. Apparently, Wilbur was just fiddling with an empty cardboard box in the shop one day, twisting it back and forth, and suddenly, boom, he has this aha moment. He realized if you could twist or warp the wings of an airplane in that same way, you could control its roll. It was such a simple idea, inspired by watching birds, and they first tested it out on a kite way back in 1899.
But look, one great idea wasn't going to be enough to solve this. These guys weren't just tinkerers. They were serious, methodical scientists. So when their first gliders, which were based on all the existing flight data, failed miserably, they didn't just give up. Nope, they went right back to the drawing board.
And oh boy, did they fail. I mean, their 1901 glider was a disaster. It produced barely a third of the lift they calculated it would. The controls were all wrong. It was so bad that after weeks of just soul-crushing tests, a totally defeated Wilbur told Orville that man probably wouldn't fly in 1,000 years. I mean, that's their lowest point for sure.
But here's what separates the Wrights from everyone else. Instead of quitting, they got to work. They realized the problem wasn't them. It was the data. The aerodynamic tables everyone had been using for 100 years were just wrong. So what do? They build a 6-foot-long wooden box in their bike shop, the world's first proper wind tunnel. And inside, using these little measuring devices made from bicycle spokes and hacksaw blades, they tested over 200 different wing shapes. They literally created the first reliable set of aeronautical data in history, by themselves. And the result of all that hard work, it was, well, you can see it right here. It was dramatic. On the left, that's the failed 1901 glider. On the right, the 1902 glider, built using their brand new, super accurate data. The difference was just night and day. This 1902 machine flew beautifully. It was a soaring success, a true airplane, in every single way, except for one thing. It didn't have an engine. And on that 1902 glider, they figured out the final piece of the puzzle. They made the rear rudder movable and cleverly linked it to the wing warping system. This let the pilot make these perfect, smooth, coordinated turns, solving a tricky little physics problem that had plagued other designs.
So let's be clear, by the end of 1902, they had already invented the airplane. The hard part was done. All that was left was to add an engine and prove it to the world.
So with the problem of control completely solved, the brothers headed back to their shop in Dayton. It was finally time to add some power.
Of course, they couldn't just go out and buy an engine. Nobody made one that was both lightweight and powerful enough. So, in classic Wright Brothers fashion, they just decided to build one themselves. Well, actually, their amazing shop mechanic, a guy named Charlie Taylor, built it for them, from scratch, in just 6 weeks. He even cast the engine block out of aluminum, which was super rare at the time. Just a total masterpiece of garage ingenuity.
And then it was time. December 17, 1903, a cold, windy morning at Kitty Hawk. Orville is at the controls of the flyer. He takes off. The whole thing lasts 12 seconds. Just 12 seconds. It covered about 120 feet, less than the wingspan of a modern jumbo jet. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't majestic, but it was history.
If you read Orville's diary entry from that day, it's so incredibly understated. Just the facts. They actually made 4 flights that day, and the last one, with Wilbur flying, lasted almost a full minute. But again, it's so important to remember, this day wasn't the invention of the airplane. That really happened a year earlier with that amazing 1902 glider. This was just the proof, the final, powered proof that their system of control was the answer.
So you'd think this would be front-page news around the globe, right? Parades, celebrations. Nope. For the next 5 years, the world's reaction was basically a giant shrug. That and a whole lot of disbelief. The press was just deeply skeptical. And to be fair, the brothers were being super secretive. They wanted to get their patents locked down before they showed their invention to everyone. But that secrecy created a vacuum. And this headline from a Paris newspaper in 1906 pretty much says it all. The Wrights are in fact either flyers or liars.
And this doubt, it went on for years. By 1905, they were back home in a field in Ohio, perfecting their flyer, making flights that lasted over half an hour. And still, crickets. The press largely ignored them. It actually wasn't until 1908, 5 years after Kitty Hawk, that Wilbur finally went to France, put on these incredible public flight demonstrations, and just stunned the world into silence. The debate was over. The liars were flyers after all.
And just like that, they became global superstars overnight. But their real, enduring legacy? It's a bit more complicated than just fame and being the first to fly.
Because here's the thing, the Wrights didn't patent an airplane. They patented a system for controlling an airplane. Those fundamental principles of using roll, pitch, and yaw together to steer a machine through the air, the system they totally perfected back in 1902, that is the very same system that's at the heart of every single fixed-wing aircraft flying today, from a tiny little Cessna all the way up to a giant A380.
But, and this is a big but, protecting that incredible invention came at a huge cost. They spent the next decade tangled up in these nasty, bitter patent lawsuits against competitors. And yeah, they won in court, but the fight it consumed them. It completely stifled their own innovation. It got so bad that it held back American aviation as a whole, to the point that when World War I started, the U.S. didn't have a single suitable aircraft of its own to fly.
So in the end, their story is this amazing tale of brilliant insight and relentless scientific work. But it's also kind of a cautionary tale, isn't it? They gave the world this incredible gift of flight, but the battle to own and protect that gift nearly grounded them, and an entire industry along with them. It really makes you wonder, what is the true price of a world-changing idea?